We are live according to this, streaming on YouTube.
Okay.
Yes, we are.
This is
Hello,
Welcome to the
YouTube.
world.
Yes.
Do we
Welcome.
have a way of knowing how many people watch this on YouTube?
Yes, we do.
Is that enough information for you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It really is. Yeah. As long as it's, more than zero.
On the website, if on the YouTube channel itself, it'll always say at the bottom how many are watching as the meeting's going.
I got it.
By default, it's always set to 1,
Huh.
which will be usually my computer is the one that's watching. And then anything above 1 is somebody else who's joined in.
Yeah, interesting.
Dan, I think Barney's really asking if we're trending right now.
Yeah, let me say it like this. If I knew what that meant, I think I'd be pleased, but all right. Our target is we have to finish by 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Oh, 8 o'clock. Well, we better order a pizza.
We can try.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So,
It's Cal.
Hi, Cal.
Are we doing camera or non-camera?
Well, we have presentations, so it doesn't really matter. You can if you want to.
No, that's all right.
Is Terry going to join?
I
Yeah,
believe he is.
He's here.
there he is.
This dog.
Yeah, and his Cheerios or whatever those are.
Yeah, I know. What kind of cereal is that?
Fruit Loops.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
Who do we have here?
So we're live right now and it's 3:59. So whenever you're,
Okay, well, let's wait till 4 o'clock.
yeah, absolutely.
We all stare at our cell phones.
No, I'm actually staring at my computer. My computer just turned over to 4 o'clock.
Oh, mine did too.
Okay, great. So I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Finance Committee of the Park District of Highland Park for Thursday, August 20th at 4 p.m. exact. Roxanne, can you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bernstein,
Here.
Commissioner Grossberg,
Here.
President Ruttenberg.
Here too.
We have a quorum, so the next item on the agenda is public comments for items on the agenda. Executive Director Romes, has anyone submitted any public comment by emails or any other way?
No.
So no, thank you, Director Romes. I know I didn't see this on the agenda, but is there anybody who was on the call on this, who have any, wants to address the Finance Committee on any item, whether on the agenda or not on the agenda?
Yeah, it's only by email, so they wouldn't be able to.
Okay, great. So then there's nobody has any other comments with regarding items either on the agenda or not on the agenda. So
Correct.
the next item on the agenda is the approval of the Finance Committee meetings minutes from August 6th, 2020. Is there a motion?
So moved.
There's a motion by, was it President Rudberg?
Yes.
And there's a second by
Grossberg.
Commissioner Grossberg. All in favor, say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. The motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the updated financial forecasts. Director Peters to present.
Okay. Let me pull that up. Oops. Okay, are we seeing the cover page? The
Yes, we
updated
are.
financial forecast? Okay, great.
If you want to put it in presentation mode, you could do that. Otherwise, we're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and so I think we're used to our disclaimer. We see that every month. So these are our financial forecasts as of July 31st. All right. The most important slide really in this presentation is always this one because it summarizes everything else you're about to see. What we have on here is our original budgeted cash on hand for year end, which was just under $12 million. And then if we look at our month and projected cash on hand, after all of our changes due to COVID, we can see we're still really pretty close to where we had originally budgeted to be. So just a couple $100,000 off. And then, of course, also very important is that we stay in compliance with our board policy of maintaining a 25% of reserve of cash on hand at the end of the year. Okay, here we are with our slide that shows our operating funds, our general and recreation funds. If you recall, the green solid line is our budgeted revenue for the year. Our red solid line was our original budgeted expenses for the year, showing a surplus of around $3 million. Then we went back and created these dotted lines, which were our projections at May 31st. So we had our new projected revenues, we had our new projected expenditures, which would give us a surplus of roughly $1.8 million at the end of the year. And so the overall reduction between our original budget and our new COVID projections is a deficit of 1.2 million between the original number and the projected number. However, we did make our projections with worst case scenario. So we went back and we have actuals starting at May 31st, which is our green dashed line, where you can see our actual revenues are about 8.8 million versus the projections of 7.62 million. And then you can also see the dashed red expenditure, that's our actuals versus our projected, which was the dotted. So we are also coming in to the positive there with less expenditures than we had projected. And so overall, our net difference at July 31st between our actual and our COVID projections is a surplus of about $1.5 million. And that's an important number we want to keep in mind because we're going to touch on this again in 2 more slides. So just keep that in your back pocket.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sure.
Anybody else have any questions before I ask my question? I'm hearing nobody. So if I'm looking at it in real time, I see this, the net difference budget versus projected of $1.2 million. That's as of December 30th.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. But if you go in real time, so I'm looking at the numbers. So what you had originally projected for this year was 12.35 minus 11.1.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what you thought we'd be. And that
Yeah.
would be the difference is how much is that? It's 1.2 million.
Right. So we're actually doing, right. If you look at it that way, we're doing better than our original budget as far as net surplus for the year.
Because I don't want to use the word, but the word spike, really the spike in the revenue was coming in September when we had our fall programming. So I guess it's also, when you go in the future, when we talk about this, I think the real-time numbers are really also important, not just the end of the year projection, but showing where we are, how versus right now as of today or as of July 31st versus what we projected pre-COVID.
Okay. No, that's a very good point.
Okay, anybody else have any questions or comments? Hearing none, let's go to the next slide, please.
Okay. Okay, so on the slide, it's just the recreation fund. So again, at year end, we had budgeted that we would have a $2.4 million deficit because we had budgeted for our revenues to be less than our expenses. When we went through and did our projections on these dotted lines, our projected deficit grew to about a $1.3 million difference. We do then have our actuals dropped in on the dash line. So our actual expenses, or I'm sorry, actual revenue here in green is about 3.56 million versus our worst case scenario projected of 2.98 million. And then also we can see our actual expenses, the dash line, are trending slightly below what our projected worst case scenario expenditures were, which gives us a difference of roughly $710,000 that we're doing better than our worst case scenario projections. And then Cal, we can go back and look at how you were just looking on the other slide. We can do sort of a comparative there. So our I'll just call this about $1 million. We were anticipating to be about $1 million in the hole originally in the budget. And so, you know, we're showing that differential to be about 710 now. So roughly, I'd say a $300,000 difference. And remember, the 710 is part of that 1.5 million that we showed on the previous slide.
Okay, anybody have any questions? I don't. Okay, great. Thank you. By the way, that I read that as about 800,000, not $1 million difference between the 7.81 and the 6.97.
I'll give that to you. Yes, agreed.
Okay.
Agreed. Okay. All right, now here is our payroll. And so we're going to look at our original budgeted payroll of about $10 million. Then with our projections and knowing that we were having a hiring freeze and a wage freeze and furloughing of people, that came in then a projection of about 7.5 million to give us an overall expected reduction in payroll of about $2.5 million. We then go through and we plot in yellow what our actual payroll is. And in July, our actual payroll came in a little bit higher than what our projection was stated. So it came in a little bit higher to the tune of $70,000. And so when I asked you to remember the 1.5 million that we showed 2 slides ago, as far as our difference, our positive difference between actual and projected there, that's because we have been expanding our programs and you know, just basically offering more services to people, and in doing so and creating that $1.5 million of additional revenue, that takes a little bit of manpower. And so that is why we're seeing our payroll expenses a little bit higher than where we had originally projected them. And to Cal's point, if we wanted to look at just July of where we originally had us in the budget at 5.7 million, and now we're at about 4.2 million, we are still, you know, considerably much better than where our original budget was back at the beginning of the year.
Questions?
I just quickly, this chart, boy, there's a big echo. I don't know if you hear that. This chart is monthly payroll budget versus actual. So this is cumulative. I just want to be sure we know that.
That's right. Yeah.
Obviously, we're not spending $4.2 million in salaries this month.
No. And actually in July is a big month because 3 payrolls hit in July.
Okay, but it's not that big. Okay.
Right. Yeah, no, it's not 4 million. No, it's less than $1 million.
You know, can I jump in, Terry? That was a very good point to bring out, and maybe it'd be helpful if we did have a similar graph showing it monthly payroll as opposed to the cumulative payroll.
Okay, we can make one of those for next time, definitely. Okay.
Anything else, Commissioner Grossberg?
Nope.
President Rundberg?
I'm good.
Okay, next slide.
Okay, then we have been looking and tracking our COVID-related expenses. So our first line was our COVID-19 supplies. We had originally obviously 0 in the budget. We are now projecting those at year end to be roughly 71,000. Then we had our lakefront staff. The original budget had been at around 33,000. We're now projecting year end to be at 108,000, which would give us a $76,000 difference. And then we were asked to put in our lost operating revenue due to the COVID. And so it looks to be about $6.2 million. And so that brings us down to a total net difference between budget and our year-end projected of about $6.4 million.
What is our total expense budget normally? What was the number that we would have spent?
It's, you know, considering what you put in there, anywhere from like $20 to $24 million.
Okay, so COVID is, if we take the lost revenue, which I know is not quite the right number, we've got, you know, what, 10% would be 2, 4, that's like 30%.
Yeah, it's it's a big number.
And I'm glad, this is helpful to have the lost operating revenue in one place to see the full impact on us.
Right. No, it's huge. It's really huge. And you know, we are still hopeful that Washington comes out with some sort of a lost revenue funding program, but so far there is not one.
So are we still running any a monthly deficit? I shouldn't say, never mind. I withdraw the question. Anybody else have any questions, comments? Okay, next slide.
Okay, that's the end of this presentation, actually.
Okay, any comments, board members?
No, you know why we don't is because now we're totally getting used to this, you know, at least that's from my standpoint. You know, I probably had 10 questions the first time it was proposed like this, but now that we're getting it every few weeks, this, you know, there's no big wows in here that much, you know.
Right.
President Rundberg?
No, I think I echo what Terry said. And I think, as you've said, Cal, having this every 2 weeks really is incredibly helpful.
Okay.
Okay, I only have one question. So if you had to summarize what you just presented us in one paragraph, it's the status, the current status and the projected status of the district, what would that paragraph, how would that read?
So I think we are holding our own and doing better than what our projections had put together, which of course those were worst case scenarios. So we hope to do better than those. We are doing better than those. And I think staff are coming up with new and creative ideas every day to continue to make our numbers look better. And just as sort of an aside to that, I was on the phone for a good half hour this morning with PMA, just sort of reviewing things. And they were very complimentary of how our numbers are looking compared to many other park districts around that they're working with. So I think we're really doing a good job.
Well, thank you for keeping that within one paragraph. Anybody else have anything?
I concur.
Okay, all right. Is that this? So that's it for the updated financial forecast?
Yes.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the 2021 tax levy. Director Peters to present.
Okay, let me pull that up. Okay. Okay. All right, can everyone see a screen that says tax levy 2020?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, great. All
You
right,
wanna
so.
Put it in presentation mode again.
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, so we are starting to look, oh my, well, okay, hold on for a second. Let's go back. Okay, so we are starting to prepare for our tax levy that will, of course, be passed in one way, shape, or form in December. And that then affects our financial statements for 2021 and our tax extension for 2021. And so we're going to do a somewhat high-level review of that now. And we want to start our presentation by reminding ourselves of what our draft of our 5-year capital plan is looking like at the moment. If you recall, over the past month or two, we have taken our capital plan and placed it into tiers. Our tiers 1 through 3 are considered our maintenance tiers of capital projects, and tiers 4 through 5 are really our capital improvement projects. And so if we look down in this chart, which we had seen previously, if we total up the tiers 1, 2, and 3, where we're over here, I think that's about 24 to 25 million. My screen is blacked on that side at the moment. Let's see if I get, there we go. It's about $24.5 million. And then our total of tier 4 and 5 right now is about 7.2 million for an overall 5-year capital plan of roughly $31 million. And obviously, if you recall too, the funding for our capital plan really comes from transfers from money that is generated over in our operating funds. This is our 5-year funding model, which I think you have seen previously. And what we did is we updated this and we dropped in the spending of all tiers 1 through 5. So it would be maintaining our capital and having capital improvement plans. So you can see our fund balance from our audited CAFR, and then we hit our bond proceeds in February. Now this year, because of the COVID, even though we had budgeted to transfer 2.5 million, and I think we have transferred 2.5 million somewhat consistently over past years, we've put that down at 1 million. We're trying to be pretty ultra conservative here with what we're doing, just because we really, we're not sure what the future holds for us. Now we do feel pretty good about the 450 from special rec, and if for some reason that doesn't get spent, we could always, use that in the following year. This capital projects number ties in from the chart we just looked at. And so, it rolls down showing that we would anticipate our year-end capital fund to be at about $10.4 million. And then this just trickles down year after year. And again, you can see we have kept our transfers from the recreation fund very conservative at a 1.5 million for the next 2 years. Again, not knowing what's going to happen with the coronavirus. And so if we keep this very conservative, I'll call it a worst case scenario, things don't look so good for all 5 tiers of our capital projects at the end of 2022. However, if we look at this same model, but just focus on tiers 1 through 3, which would be maintaining our capital and not including improvements or new capital, we look very good on a conservative basis through the next 5 years. Okay, so before we go on to our next slides, do we have any questions about these first couple of capital?
Commissioner Grossberg,
Nope.
President Ruttenberg.
My only comment is these are raw numbers, and we really need to view these in connection with what are we doing for the $4.5 million in 2021. Therein lies the rub. Raw numbers say that we have a lot. We have 7 million, 8 million, 5 million, but we're giving up things.
Yeah, I would say this is, I know that at the last meeting, I believe we went through or the meeting before, I'm getting confused, but we went through the 5-year capital plan. And it would be helpful if, when we look at these numbers again, that we get a short presentation of what's included within those tier 1 through 3, just like a short, a summary of what's in tier 1 through 3 and what are the major projects in tier 4 and 5. For example, my question would be, I know that we've talked about in the past replacing West Ridge. Is that a tier 1 through 3 or tier 4 through 5?
Replacing West Ridge is not in these numbers. Some more necessary items are in these numbers. And if you want more data, Jeff or Brian could probably jump in better. But what I will say is that our next finance committee meeting is when we plan to bring forward the capital budget for next year.
Okay.
We could look at
We'll include the 5-year projections.
Okay, so we'll just table that discussion until the next meeting. But so I guess when we see the next meeting, obviously you're going to break out again tiers 1 through 3 and tiers 4 through 5. And is there going to be a separate discussion regarding green print items like Centennial and West Ridge, or are they included in those tiers 1 through 5 discussions?
They're all included.
Okay, so we'll just wait till the next meeting to have that discussion.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, are we ready to move forward?
Any other questions or comments? Okay,
No.
let's go.
Okay, all right. So getting back to our tax 2020, I want to just remind everyone where we ended up for the year ended 12/31/2019. For that year, tax revenues made up 53% of our revenue, and operations made up 47% of our revenue. We know for the year ending 12/31/2020, We are not going to have such an even split. We know that tax revenues are going to play a much more larger percentage of how our operating income ends up this year because we had such significant reduction in operations and cessation of operations.
Well, you know, it's funny, I could jump in. If you went back a step and on this slide, and we know that, let's assume tax revenue stays the same, operating income is, and expenses are down approximately 30%.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
you could just use the projection right here.
Right, yes, yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's like
That's-
it's like 70-30 or some number like that.
That's what
Yes,
that's.
it would be, yeah, you know, right now, right, that's right,
If you-
that is what we're looking at.
Yeah, if you took a snapshot right now, I think that's where that 6.2 number that we talked about earlier fits in, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Right.
If Cal would listen to me, but no.
Yeah, so
No,
we
you
would
catch
not
me,
nearly
you
be as
know,
balanced.
by the way, it's still at work. I'm billing this time at the same time, so, okay, you know.
Wow.
Well,
Okay.
that's, I mean, that's not uncommon.
Yeah, okay. I'm joking, by the way, people listening on Zoom. I'm not.
Right, remember we are live streamed.
I am
but,
completely and utterly concentrating on this presentation.
Thank you. Yes, I like your attention. But yes, so absolutely. So our scale here is going to become more unbalanced at the end of this year, definitely. Okay, so a bit of a tax refresher for everyone. We recall tax cap law allows park districts to increase the levy in two ways. The first is by CPI. It's actually limited by 5% or CPI, whichever is lower. So you always know what your CPI is going to be a year in advance because the amount of CPI that we get to increase our levy by or the number is decided at 12/31/19. So this is the CPI at 12/31/19, which is used for the 2020 tax levy, which is then received in the tax extension during 2021. We also know that as of July 31st, the CPI during this year, the COVID year, is at about 0.8%. PMA advises us to use a CPI of 1%, which is anticipated at 12/31/2020, which is what would be used then when we levy taxes in December of 2021. Okay, so that is one side of it. And then the other side is you always want to capture your new growth, all the new EAVs that come onto the books, as well as any sorts of additions to properties that we have here in Highland Park. Keep in mind that property taxes provide critical funding that supports the district's mission by funding existing infrastructure and operations. And we have a lot of infrastructure. We have 45 parks, 800 acres, and 11 facilities. We also use the money to fund capital improvements, repair and replacement projects, which you just saw are a little over $30 million for the next 5 years. If you ask PDERMA, we have $68 million of insured assets that we need to maintain. And as we saw on our slide with the scale, it also contributes to 50%, really more than 50% of the district's annual $24 million of operational expenses. And so we ask ourselves, why do we seek to collect or why do we seek the entire available levy increase? The levy is affected naturally via the CPI factor used that is automatically adjusted through economic conditions. So as we just discussed, this year is a bad year with the pandemic. And so because of that, the CPI will come down. It's a natural number that flows, in and out with the flows of the economy. And then that gets imposed on our taxpayers the following year. Current new growth, if we miss it, we cannot access that in future years, as well as uncollected tax revenue cannot be recaptured in future years. So increasing the levy by the CPI and the new growth avoids a negative impact on all future levies, our operating budgets, and long-term funding for our capital repair and replacement. Statutory tax rates have often remained constant while inflation has weakened the Park District budgetary process. And we're going to see that in a couple of real examples in a few more slides. The district would be giving up necessary revenue without an alternative source to replace it, which could have a devastating impact on district infrastructure and operations. And so, what we're saying here is if we don't tax our full amount, right now in a pandemic, obviously our operating income is suffering and there's nothing else out there to replace it. If we under levy, we could also hurt our AAA bond rating and cause it to be downgraded to a AA rating or worse. And then the other thing to keep in mind, if for some reason 2021 ends up being an awesome year and we have more money than we know what to do with, we can rebate any portion of our property tax at any time in the future. And when you do that, that does not affect your ability to then go ahead and tax the full CPI at the end of that year.
Let's,
Right now-
wait, Marilyn, let's pause right here.
Okay.
And I want to explore this, two things.
Okay.
When you under levying could hurt the district's AAA bond rating. Is that what the underwriters are telling us? If we do not raise taxes, at least by the CPI, we could be downgraded?
So they don't say that. When we issued our bonds this year, one of the items they looked at and one of the things they just, I would say brought attention to was our shrinking fund balances. And so of course, if we are not levying the full amount, we're not pulling in as much as we could, that is leaving less money in our reserves.
And so that could affect when if we go to borrow more money, that we'd pay a slightly higher interest rate.
Absolutely, yes.
All right.
Yes.
And then the second point, if we did increase it by the CPI, how would it be implemented that we could rebate property tax it collects at a later date? How would that be implemented?
So you could do it a number of different ways. The Village of Rosemont, who has an incredibly high taxes coming into that village, and they only have 4,000 residents. So they rebate taxes many years. I'm not sure if that's happening this year, but usually every August when they're done with their tax cycle, that's Cook County, they rebate taxes. They call it a beautification grant to all the homeowners, and everyone gets the same exact amount. I'm also familiar I believe it's Oswego. They have occasionally rebated money. Theirs is based on a percent of property taxes that were collected. So say they rebate, 5% of the amount that everybody paid in. So it can be done in different ways. And, if that was something we'd want to do, I would want to, obviously partner up with PMA and they could give us, different examples of thought processes of how you would want to go about doing it. And then the best thing about that is that we don't lose, the CPI is based on your prior year's extension. And so if we did rebate, that doesn't get affected. Whereas if you have a property tax freeze, that does affect your extension, and then that harms you into the future.
Okay, that's something let's continue, but that's something we should discuss, obviously.
Right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can we not increase the levy by CPI and still take advantage of the new growth?
Yes.
And how's that done?
So when you do new growth, I think I used this term last year, although when I was really new and it was mostly prepared by Elliot, but you always want to cast your net as far as you can when you're trying to capture new growth. But generally you don't go over, you don't want to hit 5%. You kind of aim for like a 4.8, 4.9 so that you can capture everything that has come in the books. Now we know, and this will require more research as we get closer, because we want to wait as long as we possibly can to see what all new growth sort of hits our books. Because we know we have some new construction that has been going on, and I'm not sure if it is, hit the books or not yet, that we can cast into our taxation as far as considering it new property. So that's something that gets done as late as we possibly can. So I would say October, everything that kind of hits at that point. And we have to get a feel from working with Lake County and seeing what new properties are coming on, what properties have had additions put on them, and see where that number is. If you hit that 5%, if you feel that the new EAV growth in our property tax basis is more than 5%, we can still tax that new growth. Although then you have to have a public hearing and it can create more objections. It just becomes a little bit more complicated, but we would not want to leave any of that out there.
Is there any way that, and I guess I'm just talking hypothetically here, is that by having an extensive amount of new growth, that would help mitigate the need to increase the CPI factor?
I am going to say we should do both, and we're going to have an example, our true example of what would happen if we do freeze our taxes and don't increase it by the CPI. And we're also going to go back and take a look at the last time that we did freeze taxes and see what those amounts, have cumulatively added up to.
No, but I get all that, and I reviewed the slides, and I was here when we did that, so I get all that.
Okay.
My question goes back to, is that if there's more new growth, then is there something that, like, for example, is if we lobby the city, for example, to allow for more new growth, is there any way that that by having an additional more new growth, then that would provide us an opportunity that, because we'd be capturing, I guess, money through the new growth levy to help mitigate us against CPI. I'm not saying necessarily for 2020, but I'm saying in the future, is if that's something that we want to join in with our fellow sister governments, the schools and things like that, to encourage that, to help mitigate the requirement to increase the CPI levy, because obviously there's a certain amount of money that we're going to need to maintain and grow the district. I get that, but but I'm asked, I guess it's a long-winded way of asking, can we, like, new growth our way out of a problem, and so it would, the tax the tax obligations then go to new growth rather than throughout the entire community.
Right.
You understand my question?
I think I do. And I think what I'm going to say, the reason that the tax code is the way it is, why you have CPI, which, is everyone, and then you have these new growth, the new EAVs. When you bring new growth on, to me, it's because you have new growth, you have new residents. So we are increasing our population, and we need to serve that new growth too. So when you have a new growth area, or like a new development, like say condos or townhouses in a certain area, a lot of times the new growth dollars are thought of to kind of maybe put a park in that area, maybe enlarge in a park in a certain area that's near that, if the new growth is concentrated in one area. Whereas to me, the CPI is meant to go towards the whole park district. And I understand the further you get away from that initial new growth, then it just becomes kind of part of your whole CPI that is more community spread. So I guess I'm not sure if I'm answering.
So I think if I'm understanding you, then when we capture revenue from new growth, that helps mitigate that new growth's impact on the district, because there could be more use because of the new growth. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if I could interpret that, if somebody built a large new residential tower, let's just say just west of the downtown area of Highland Park, you would expect there to be an impact on the district, aside from the impact fees, but an impact on the district by more people using our facilities. And the new growth is designed partially to capture the additional cost to the district from the new residents generated by that large new apartment building.
Exactly, because maybe, so now suddenly it's harder to get a tennis court because I just had 500 people move into this tower, as you called it, right? Those residents are, all assumed to be going to all of our parks and our facilities. And so they may become more crowded.
Mhm.
worn out quicker. There may be a shortage of tennis courts, or I can't get a tea time anymore. So that's kind of what the new growth funding is meant to help with that.
So it sounds like the new growth, we should segregate new growth because that's going to be, we're going to need to use that money to invest in the district to basically to mitigate the impact of having more residents in the community, that we shouldn't try to, let's say, for example, maybe rob it or treat it as a piggy bank, that it could be used, it could be used rather than doing other things throughout the district, whether increasing revenue through higher fees or from higher taxes.
Agreed. Yes, that's the way I would look at it.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything?
Yeah, I do. I'm very sympathetic to the staff wanting our support for this. And there are many points that, when I read the slides, the one that hit me the most was this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth one, the district would be giving up necessary revenue without an alternative source to replace it. I mean, ordinarily we could say, hey, let's pump up our athletics, or let's get the rec center, moving a little bit, or whatever like that. But we don't have that option right now. What I would ask staff, at least from my standpoint, is I want you to cut out all the hyperbole you can from a public presentation like this. In other words, if there's anything that you just kind of throwing in there, just, hey, what else can we put in? I think the case is strong, I guess is what I'm saying. With a bullet point like that fifth one, that I wouldn't want anything
1, 2, 3,
on
4,
there
5.
that somebody could, actually, maybe it's the sixth one, but whatever that fifth arrow is. If there's just anything in there that's just a little bit dubious or a little bit weaker than the other points, in just my opinion, like, I feel like it's a bit of a hyperbole, and I could be wrong. The next point, that it could hurt the district's AAA bond rating. I understand that it could eventually lower our the 25% that we have there, but it just seems like that's a little bit of red flashing alarm bells that maybe are more yellow than red. That's just my feeling on it. I want you to be, just nail it with 3 or 4 things that are super important and are right on. I don't need.
Well, let me answer something if I could. I'm sure that I jumped over Cal, and I apologize. One of the problems, Terry, is if we do not take, and I'm not advocating for us to do it, if we do not raise taxes by the CPI factor, you can never go back, and it's a ripple effect. So that if the taxes with CPI would be $1.05, but we only tax it $1, the next year we raise it by the CPI, but we've lost that 5 cents.
Yeah, you don't have to convince me. I not only do I understand it, I agree with it. I'm just saying, for the district to put together a rationale, I want it to be all solid. Like what you just said, that's super solid.
Well, yeah, but I think we also have to be sensitive, and the reason, and I appreciate what you're saying about the presentation, and you are now the committee of one to help work on it. But I think, we also have to, and I know that we've been talking about maybe we don't do the CPI, we have a rebate. Our problem is we have to understand that the community is suffering. And we're going to have a very serious policy discussion as to what we do on taxes and where the budget goes, and whether or not the budget is to be held consistent with what we have this year without any increases. And we stay with no tax increase. I mean, that's an important thing that that we'll have to discuss. And that's, obviously not just for this conversation, but that's going to take a serious conversation at the board.
Yeah, that we're not having that conversation right now, but I think what Terry is alluding to, and I frankly, when I saw this, I agreed with them, is that I am hard pressed to believe that if we don't increase the CPI factor, which obviously is an important thing, I don't think it's going to be a devastating impact on the district's infrastructure and operations. I think that's that language is a little over the top. I think if it was more factual rather than, I'm using Terry's word, hyperbole, I think that it'd be more helpful. We understand the issues. And we don't need to be scared about this. I don't think that it's that regardless, whatever decisions we're kind of nibbling around the edges, I don't think it's going to be a devastating impact. So if you could just clean up some of that language, it'd be appreciated.
That's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Okay, so now that we know that we won't have a devastating impact,
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's go on to the next slide.
Okay. All right. So talk about devastating impacts or not. Let's go back and look at 2010 when we did freeze taxes. My understanding, we froze taxes in 2010, 2011, and 2012. And so the black bar is the extension.
Mhm.
The blue bar is what we could have levied with the CPI. And so you'll see the first year that we froze taxes that we sacrificed roughly $1 million there. Okay. And then the second year of our freeze, we sacrificed roughly, we'll call it $1.3 million. The third year, we gave up about another, I guess I'll call it $1.3 million. And so on and so forth for 10 years, because we did start levying again in this fourth year, but of course our basis was much smaller because we hadn't raised it by CPI. And so if you add up this million something and this million something and this million something, over the past 10 years, we did give up $11.6 million. And so I don't know if the word is devastating or not, but,
Right.
and I am somewhat new here, but when I just hear of some of the things that I've heard over the past 6 months, you know, some of our parks are suffering, we've limited green print projects. Do we have the money to fix the barge at Park Avenue? Should we be sprucing up Westridge? Should we be expanding our racket sports? And just having a larger overall capital budget, you know, this amount is true lost dollars over the past 10 years from freezing taxes. And I don't want to focus on the past. I'm just throwing it out there that this is a very legitimate number.
Can I jump in?
You go right ahead.
Gail or Bernie, can I jump in
Terry,
for a minute?
Terry, before you say anything, I just want to say this. I was on the board when we agreed to freeze those 3 years. And I will mention one of the reasons why we did it, besides the pension issue, but really the reason that convinced me to do it is that the district at that time did not have a master plan, nor did it even have a 5-year capital plan. It was operating on a 1-year basis, basically a shoestring. Basically every year they were coming up with a capital plan. So there was no justification at that time to address the CPI or increase the levy, because there was no reason to it, because we had no master plan, nor did we have a 5-year capital plan. The difference between that situation and now is, and you can see in 2013 is when we started having 5-year capital plans, and we started increasing it by the CPI, because at that point there was a justification for increasing the levy. So it's a little different apples and oranges. The district was not in a position at that point to increase levy because they didn't know how they were going to spend the money. Previous to that, they were just increasing the levy just because they can do it. They didn't have a justification. I think our situation is different. And
Okay.
after saying that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Grossberg.
Okay, so this to me, let's say I was a real conservative, a fiscal conservative. This to me would be the happiest chart I've ever seen. This is what I'm saying. This to me, I think that in 2019, we were doing pretty darn well, despite the fact that we left 11.6 on the board. And a conservative person, somebody more conservative than even I fiscally, would look at this and go, look at that. Look at how much money we save the taxpayer. And yet we persist. Yet we have these beautiful parks and we have these beautiful beaches. And so I just want you to be very careful with this, because yes, we did leave that money And yet we pride ourselves on having a pretty good budget and we have a pretty good park district and things like that. This is another thing that concerns me. I just want you to think about it from an illiberal standpoint. Okay? Give you something
Yeah,
to think about.
And I recognize that comment, although I'm not sure if illiberal is a word. So I'll just leave it at that.
Illiberal.
Can I add one other maybe relevant factor that I think maybe Cal have played into your the board's decision at that point. At that time, I believe we had $24 million in reserves in 2010.
Which is correct.
And today, I think we said closer to 14. So we were also in a different spot with our reserves.
Yeah, that's actually, Brian, that's a very good point, because it was a combination of lack of having plans and having too much reserves led us to making those decisions.
Right.
All the more reason why your case is strong. Don't muddy it up with things that can be ill interpreted or just slightly weaker evidence. I think what you just said is very important. We don't have as strong reserves as we used to have. And thus, if we gave up on this money, we could conceivably at some point fall below our strategic reserve. That is a core nugget of how we keep good accounting in our district.
I think, Terry, that's a good point. And I also think that one of the advantages that we have today versus than we had in 2010 is that we have spent the last 10 years planning through Greenprint and doing these 5-year capital plans and doing these tier 1s now and tier 5s is that we have kind of what we need, what we believe we need to spend the money on and how we're going to, so we know what our capital needs are. We didn't really know that in 2010. So I'll let the phone go. So in 2010, we didn't really know what our capital needs were beyond maybe 1 year in the future. So I think that that going forward, to get into Barney's point earlier, and I really don't want to spend a lot of time debating it today, but getting to that point is that because we have a better handle on the situation today, is that we're going to have to figure out where our revenue is going to come from, and where's our revenue is going to come from to implement our 5-year capital plan and our Greenprint plan. And if we don't have that revenue, we don't have a source of that revenue, then we're going to have to either cut back, not do projects, or cut back programming. Something's going to have to give. You just can't, without being able to fund it, we can't do it. So that's something that, as these discussions evolve over the next couple months at the Finance Committee, before we even bring this to the board, I think we all have to be cognizant of those issues. Sorry, I'm still at work right now, guys. Anybody else have any other comments? Did I lose you guys?
No, we're
Okay.
here.
Okay, good.
Stunned.
I'm sorry, I got like all my phones are going off here at the office. I apologize.
Yes, you sound very busy,
No
Cal.
problem.
Okay,
no
I'm
problem.
sorry.
We're just being patient. No worries.
Okay, so next slide, please.
Okay, so instead of looking back, let's look forward. And so this is where we are for 2020. And if we did want to freeze property taxes for 2020, that would be here, the black bar. Again, the blue bar would be what we could actually levy with our 2.3% CPI. For next year, at the instruction of PMA, and as we discussed earlier, they are projecting a 1% CPI for the year ending 12/31/2020. And then they told me to use a 1.5 CPI outgoing. That's what they felt would be most appropriate at this point. So if we did decide to freeze for this year and then carry on with projected CPIs, this is just an approximation of the amount of money that would be left on the table over the next 10 years. So it would be almost $14 million. The other thing to keep in mind is that the state of Illinois over the past few years has kind of brought up, several times of the state freezing property taxes. And so, there is a chance that at one point they may come in and take over and put us at one of these black bars versus a blue bar, and saying that they are freezing property taxes. We have no idea if it would be 1 year or, while they redo the tax code or whatever would happen. But that is just something else to keep in mind too, that could affect this model that we're showing here.
So you're basically talking about $1.1 million per year if we freeze it just for 1 year.
Pretty much so, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we're using a steady CPI assumption of the 1.5%.
Right.
And the killer this year is because CPI is 2.3%, which is, pretty big considering that next year we're expecting it to go down to 1%.
Questions, comments?
I went way back in an earlier slide.
Do you want me to go back, Barney?
No. You brought up the possibility of a tax rebate.
Yes.
And the effect of which means that our revenues are catching up to what our expenses are with the taxes coming in, and operating revenue from fees, et cetera, are making us hit our budget.
Mhm.
And a 1% increase on a $20,000 tax bill is $200. And that's what we're talking about.
Right. And we're gonna, on our next slide, we're gonna actually look at a real life situation too, if we did do a tax freeze.
Barney, I would just say is that, I get it that we have the ability to do the rebate, but we heard earlier that we have $31 million worth of projects to do over the next 5 years. And I don't even think that included West Ridge. Maybe it did, maybe it did not include West
No.
Ridge.
No.
So, if you include West Ridge, and we're $42 million or so. So it's highly unlikely that we would do a rebate considering the amount of projects that we have in the pipeline, but that's something that the board will have to make a determination on. Okay. All right, next slide.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So on the next slide, we have an actual property tax bill for a resident of Highland Park. If you keep in mind, the median home value in Highland Park is $585,000. So this one's a little higher. It's at $615,000. And our resident, John Doe here, this is his property tax bill, and you can see what he pays for property taxes to the Park District. It's about $1,100 of his total $16,000 tax bill. So 7% of his tax bill comes to the Park District in 2 payments, because the tax bills come twice a year. So if we took John Doe's tax bill, his $650,000 home, and we we froze taxes, his 2.3%, it would save him roughly $26 to the Park District. So it would be 2 payments of $13. Again, his tax bill comes twice a year. But to the district, and again, the word devastating or not devastating, to the district, it would be roughly $1.3 million in that first year.
I would say maybe material impact or significant impact. I don't think the word devastating is the right word.
That's okay. It's fine.
Okay. All right, Commissioner
We'll revise
Grossberg.
that for the next presentation.
Yes, we'll change new verbiage next time around.
Okay,
Definitely.
Commissioner Grossberg, any comments?
Yeah, I would agree. Just really go over this and really think through it. Because again, there are a number of people, and it was the kind of people that would tune into a budget discussion like that would be like, bravo, I'll take that $26. So I'm just saying.
President Ruttenberg?
Keep rolling down.
Okay, I would just add is that one of the things that staff has made in the past, and obviously not you, one of the tone deaf things is when they just say that it's just $26 or it's just 20, or $30, or it's less than a Starbucks a day. I remember Pete Kokas made that comment one time when we were talking about one taxing. So I think people find that very offensive. So if you just keep to the number, because the number really it speaks for itself. We don't have to try to to justify it. I mean, it is what it is. And so again, the metaphors really don't work. So, okay, next slide.
Okay. All right, so we talked before about
Oh,
statutory.
that was cool. Oh, that one was really cool.
That is
Marilyn's
Scott.
getting good at this.
Yeah. So that's the whole finance team doing this. But the next slide, we want to, the next couple of slides, I just want to show you a few examples of where we talked about earlier about statutory rates of the CPI versus inflation. And so if we look at a couple of line items in our actual financial statements, one of them, the computer and software expense, and you can see our expenses for the past 5 years continue to increase pretty rapidly. In fact, the total expense increase over the past 5 years in computer and software expense is 175% versus the total combined CPI increase is only 6.8%. And so you can see that we definitely have expenses here at the district that by far outpace what we get from levying, a tax levy with a full CPI each year. And I'm going to show you another example, which would be health insurance. And health insurance, you hear about this in public and private industry, how runaway health insurance costs are too. And again, you can see ours for the past 5 years. They continue to increase. And in total, they've increased 20.3% over the past 5 years. And again, of course, the CPI has a cumulative 6.8% increase. So again, we do have expenses that are outpacing what we are statutorily allowed to increase property taxes by. And so with that, this presentation is done, and I wonder if you have any more questions.
I just have one question. When does this come back to us after today?
Say that one more time.
When does this come back to the finance committee? Is this our only discussion on the tax levy, or is this going to come back again?
Well, I would say that would be up to the members of the finance committee.
So, yeah, but I think, our focus in September is going to be capital, right? And then so it would probably, well, Mary Lynn, I mean, yeah, I guess it would be based on what the finance committee wanted us to bring it back.
Here's my suggestion. I mean, Barney brings up some very good points. And I think that I think I'd like to have that as a discussion point at the finance committee before we go to the board. And let's talk about it here because we could spend more time on it than you can at the board level. And so I think the issues that Barney raised today deserve to be heard. And I think that if we could put that on a future agenda before we take it to the board, and then after our discussion at the finance committee, we'll take that to the board, and the board will ultimately make the decision. But I think that discussion, we deserve to have that discussion.
And I think we should look at alternative budgets with, keeping the budget flat with the 1%, whatever the percentage increase is. Not the tax increase, but where's the budget going to go? I mean, we should obviously try to keep the budget as flat as we can.
I mean, I really, I don't envy the staff's position trying to do a budget in the world of COVID, trying to estimate what revenues are and expenses are going to be for next year. Because as we saw earlier in this meeting, how much a dramatic change which has occurred and everything. But I do, in that discussion, when we talk about the 2021 levy, it's just not budgetary items and revenue and expenses that we're talking about. It's also the capital plan. We're looking at probably $40 or $45 million worth of capital projects within the next 5 years if we decide to do West Ridge, and that somehow has to be paid for. So I think that when we have that discussion, we'll have to do in the context of both operations and also capital planning.
Well, you've left off the third consideration, which is public trust. And I don't mean that from, people trusting us, but that we are the conservators of this budget. And so we have to also keep that. I don't think the Park District Board looks at being voted in or out when we take our votes. I don't think we're political animals from that sort of thing, but we do represent a number of different types of people who will either smile or frown at this. So that, whether we want to admit it or not, we do have to consider that.
I get, there's obviously you can't ignore the politics of it. My tenure on the board, I constantly bring up the politics of everything that we bring and the optics of it. Again, I just said it just has to be a global discussion, because the tax levy just does not fund day-to-day operations. It also helps fund capital planning, and maybe we get to, during that discussion, we come to the point, if you decide we want to be flat, reduce, or even increase at a smaller amount, that at that point we address those concerns with scaling back our capital plan. I mean, maybe that's something's gonna have to give somewhere, whether it's through the levy, through our operations, or through our capital. Somewhere along the line, something's gonna have to give. And that's the balancing act that we get paid the big bucks to try to figure out. And that's what we'll have that discussion when we'll try to figure it out. Anybody else? I mean, unless anybody else think different.
No, I think you're 100% right, Cal and Terry. I think both of you are hitting the points. We will have to look at it, and staff will look at it, I'm sure, with a very fine point on the pencil. And maybe have to revisit the tier 1 through 5 aspects and see what else we can or cannot do.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're doing this in the right order, because we brought this up now. We're going to spend our next 2 meetings talking about capital, and then I think we'll have a better understanding then going into that discussion about the 2021 levy and future years levies, as we digest what our capital needs are, which will hopefully be able to get a better understanding as we proceed over the next month or so.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting when golf revenue stops.
Yeah, I mean, golf. I mean, I know Ryan's on this call. I mean, we're doing very well at the golf course. Let me put it that way. So, all right. I think we've kind of exhausted the levy discussion at this point. We'll put this on a future agenda after we get done talking about capital and before the levy's brought to the entire board. I think that's our plan, if that's okay with staff.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to say that was helpful is, we talk about tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but this time when you went through the tiers, it also said critical, must do, etc. It had the label as opposed to just saying tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's what we got to keep in our mind. What does tier 1 mean?
Yeah. And I think we'll go through that more expansively at the next meeting.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Next item on the agenda is the property facility acquisition opportunities. Director Romes to present.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen then.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to ask before I do it, where was that picture with the flowers?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Someone
Me
on my
too.
staff found that picture. So I'd have to go ask them. I did not personally put that picture in there.
We can only use Park District facilities in our pictures.
Understood.
I do have a question. Terry, was your beard always that gray?
Just actually an hour ago, it wasn't. It was the
Oh.
yeah, it was the finance meeting. Actually, not joking, today was the first day of school.
That's the reason.
That's what it was.
That's definitely what it was.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
All right, I'm just going to keep it on the dogs.
Okay.
All right, Brian.
All right, so I have one actually update that I wanted to provide to the Finance Committee, and this is in relation to what is known as the Highland Park Fieldhouse. This is just north of Target on Skokie Valley Road, 2205 Skokie Valley Road. It's the lot 3 of the property that we lease from the city, 99-year lease with the city, and we lease that sublease, I guess, a portion of that property to HP, the HP Dome. And that lease actually has been with the Park District. It was originally a 10-year lease agreement that started in 2009. It expired. We extended it for 2 years. So it is set to expire in April 30th of 2021. The owner of that field house has actually contacted us to let us know that he would like to not re-up on the lease, but he wants to donate it in full to the Park District. There were some other details that were shared in regards to a potential scholarship endowment fund for the Park District for employees who worked for the Park District to help with potential college scholarships. But we've had some preliminary conversations, and I've spoken with the owner a few times. Cal actually joined for a short period yesterday on a phone call as well. So we're certainly grateful for the offer of the owner to donate this field house to the Park District. We are a user of that facility, and it does fit in nicely with obviously our mission to provide athletic programs. So some next steps that we've discussed, and Tom and I, the owner, have agreed that we would probably engage in some conversations every week, a set time, just to kind of keep conversation going as we want to put together a responsible pro forma to understand what a donation to the Park District would mean from a financial perspective. So some of the things that we've just kind of started to begin to talk about is, for example, we would probably just want to do our own financial audit of the finances to understand what has been going on there financially over the past 10 years. We would also want to do an engineering assessment to understand the mechanicals, understand the electric, the structure itself, and even look at, it doesn't really have plumbing. There is a temporary bathroom there, but we would want to look at, what would we want to do in the future. So we also would look at ADA accessibility, make sure it was in compliance with all of our standards. And we would work with Paderma on an appraisal of that as well. We've actually just spoken with Paderma, and this is something they're going to do for us with all of our properties anyway. But it's good timing for that. And we, of course, want to talk with the city just in regards to some zoning requirements with it going up and down. So there's a list. And like I said, I've talked with Cal a little bit about this and talked with Barney a little bit about this. So I just wanted to bring it to the Finance Committee just as sort of a first step to give you the information that we have so far, which is limited, but this is where we're at. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or discuss any next steps that the Finance Committee would like to see.
Commissioner Grossberg?
Go ahead, Barney.
Barney? Excuse me, President Ruttenberg.
Oh, stop it. I was on mute, and so you didn't hear me ask my 4 questions. I can't remember what they were.
No,
No, I think it's, it's a good opportunity, I hope, for us to take more control of a facility that benefits us.
Yeah, I agree. It's very exciting. I mentioned that on the call when I was the couple minutes I was on the call with Mr. Rubio. I would at the next, if over the next couple of weeks, Brian, if you can come up with a timeline on when you anticipate certain benchmark, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Oh, and the other thing, and when Brian and I first talked about it, I'm not on mute. Good. We should get an outline from him. I don't know if we have it yet, Brian, an outline of what he's proposing.
Like a letter of intent, some very similar.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Brian, it's all in your hands. Good luck. Any other business, Director Peters?
So the only thing we have is we'd like to present you with the next 2 dates that we are looking at to have our Finance Committee meetings in September. So we are looking at Thursday, September 10th and Thursday, September 17th. And I would assume those should both be at 4 p.m. so that Commissioner Grossberg has no issues attending those.
Just go ahead, Terry.
No, I'm sorry. Can you say those dates again?
Sure. Thursday, September 10th
That looks good.
and Thursday, September 17th. I'm sorry, the 7th.
We would go back-to-back weeks, you're saying?
We would, because So otherwise, it would be September 3rd, which is right before Labor Day weekend. And we're trying to do the capital budget. We're not sure. We need Labor Day weekend really to have the capital budget done and ready for presentation. And then the 17th, well, because the 10th is the week of a board meeting and we understand that. And so originally we tried to have these not weeks of board meetings. So that's why the next one's on the 17th, but we could certainly push that back to the 24th if so desired.
Well, the 17th is critical because that's usually when we go over the financial graphs before the board meeting.
Oh, that's true.
But with the 10th, again, that was to give staff just, we're presenting the capital budget a little sooner than we do in the past because we want to give an extra look, extra discussion with the finance committee. Normally we bring that to the finance committee in October, but we felt obviously important. So we could either do, you know, if the 10th doesn't work, let us know. We can look at other dates. But that's why the back-to-back.
They both work, yeah, they both work for me.
Okay, I would just note that it doesn't impact the high holidays. High holidays begin
I was
on
just
Friday,
looking at that.
18th and the Sunday is 27th, so I think we're fine with that.
Okay, so be it.
All right, so let it be said, so let it be written.
4 questions.
Jesus.
And that's, yeah, exactly. Okay, that was Yul Brenner, by the way, anybody discuss, that's how I was going. All right, anything else on the agenda? Any other things from any board members or staff members? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved. I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Grossberg, seconded by President Rundberg. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. The meeting is adjourned at 5:13. This was a record fast-paced finance committee meeting. I thank everybody.
Thank you.
Um,
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Go Cubs.